All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester, and it's week 10 already. It's flown by, right? Part one of our broadcast for Ajax, which is also part one. So we're doing Ajax today. With Ajax, after this week, you'll have most of the tools you need to make any enterprise level application. At least the building blocks. There's other tools, other things you need to know. But most of the building blocks you need, you already know. We've already discussed in detail object-oriented programming in JavaScript in different ways. We've used different. Last week we did a bit of an example with Create.js and a little bit of a library that we included and made that work. And this week we're going to use Ajax. So what I'm going to do, just to reset a little bit, is we got to go back to COMP125 S2018 lesson 9A, I believe, because 9B was with Create.js. I don't want to I don't want to clutter your stuff with those libraries. So I'm going to kind of make a copy of 9 and make it into 10. So I'm going to kind of do that. So I'm going to say copy. Create.js was just a real quick and dirty how to do things with Canvas, and we're going to do more of that later on. There's also, you asked about data visualization. I recommend D3 if you're looking for data visualization. D3 is a really cool framework that allows you to do things like charts and graphs, and it even does a lot of HTML on the front end. So that's really cool. Take a look at D3. Maybe we'll hit it if we have a chance to. Chances are we won't, just because we've got a really packed schedule ahead. Right? Sorry? Chapter 9. Yeah, we're going to do that as well today, but I'm gonna hit Ajax first. So I'm going to hit that later, because understanding Ajax will help you understand state too. Okay, so let's take a look at. I want to kind of hit this one. So I've created a new file, and just like normal, I'm going to just kind of get rid of the .git folder here. There we go. .git folder gone. And I'm just going to bring up my Visual Studio Code, and we're going to drag and drop this in there. And I'm just going to clean it up for you and put it up on GitHub so we can start from something together, right? So again, in my scripts, I have core and I have some objects with the person class and so on. I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm not going to use person objects right now, because I don't want to clutter your experience. So I'm just going to get rid of that whole folder. And I'm going to use this. We did a kind of a role example. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff, clean it up for you guys. This random range function that we made for chapter 9, or week 9, I mean. And in the start, we had all this code. We're just going to clean it up. And then I'm going to start from scratch today with the stuff we're going to do with Ajax. And we'll talk about what Ajax is. I also want to discuss your assignment number 3, which is up. It should be up now. So I put that up because I wanted you guys to have a head start on doing it. Usually I give a week for assignment 3. This time I'm going to give you 2 weeks. I find that sometimes assignment 3 can be a little bit crazy for some people, and we'll discuss details about assignment 3 today. So there you go. So this is all cleaned up now with our core scripts, and I'm just going to go into my index.html, make sure that there's nothing else, because otherwise it'll error out. So none of these anymore. These 2 things are gone. And that's all we have. We have a clean package again to deal with, right? So now, just like last time, I'm going to, hey man, how you doing? I'm going to do a git init, git add dot, a git commit -m, initial commit while this thing is still working. It'll actually remember what I'm typing. And then I will create a new repository up online, which is going to be lesson 10, right? So again, it's GitHub. GitHub was for the first time ever yesterday, like in a long time, went down. I had like the pink angry unicorn, which is really weird. If you get a pink angry unicorn on Git, it looks like this: GitHub, pink angry unicorn, GitHub. If you ever want to see that, it looks like this. That's what it looks like, the pink angry unicorn. When you see this symbol on GitHub, that means your GitHub is down. Again, I've only seen it like once in the last 5 years that I've ever noticed it, right? So one other time, I mean. So this was yesterday. Yesterday was Amazon Prime Day. So I think that because GitHub runs on Amazon or AWS, Amazon Web Services, at least for now, until Microsoft changes it. I think that was the cause of it. And even Amazon's website couldn't sustain all the hits, that was happening there. So interesting stuff. So this is lesson 10. Okay, so lesson 10 is going to be a very important lesson, like every other lesson, but only because we're learning Ajax for the first time. I'm going to see if we can do routing as well. Like, how can I show you how to do kind of a routing with JavaScript as well? Because a lot of front-end frameworks like React and Angular, Vue, and others, they all do some kind of custom routing that allows, kind of to make your own URLs and all that stuff. So we'll probably try and hit that at some point this semester if we can. All right, so we're good. So if you want to download lesson 10, and we can start from there together if you wanted to follow along. So it's a clean lesson. All right, so let's get into the assignment 1 part or assignment 3 part. I want to try and talk about assignment 3 a little bit and what we're going to do with it. So again, we're extending our mini portfolio site. We're going to add JSON data and Ajax components, right? And I say Ajax components, I want to think about more like HTML components. Remember we talked about this? We always have a nav bar on every page, and we repeat it over and over and over again. And John's like, can we get rid of that? Is there a way of like injecting a header and a footer? This week is the week for that. Okay, so we want to inject a header and footer by using Ajax. All right, so instead of us having the same stuff duplicated page after page after page, which is a lot of duplication, we're going to try and use Ajax to do that. So again, this is we're due week 12, so that's a couple Fridays from now. So on August 3rd, right? I think that might be the long weekend. The weekend of usually it's the first weekend of August, if I'm not wrong, is the long weekend. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe you can check it out. But anyways, this is the Friday of August 3rd, so a couple weeks from now. What you're going to do is you're going to extend your mini portfolio site that you built in assignment 1 and 2, and you will write JavaScript code to read paragraph data from a JSON file instead of the data that you have inside of your actual your files. You're going to move the data to a JSON file, a .json file, to JSON, right? And so what JSON stands for is JavaScript Object Notation, right? So you're going to have this JSON file that you're going to store your data, and you're going to read it into arrays. And the same arrays that you're using right now to inject into your site, you're just going to take it from a JSON file instead of from a string. Okay, that's the only difference. So that's the first part, and that's an easy part. The second part is you're going to use Ajax to populate your page with common components. For example, site header, navbar, site footer, all this other stuff. And you can add your own components as well. So there's 2 parts. Part 1 is this, you're going to read from this paragraphs.json file you make a paragraphs.json file. And part 2, you're going to make a header.html and a footer.html, which we're going to go try and do that if I can today or tomorrow. And you're going to populate your footer and your navbar from 2 files, a header.html and a footer.html. Furthermore, you're going to modify your site structure, and you're going to have a new views folder. All right, so you're going to have a views folder, and the views folder is going to have another folder inside of it called partials, and another folder inside of it that we're going to probably use called content. I didn't include that one. But partials, the partials folder is going to have these partial files for your header.html and your footer.html, okay? And the partial files, what they're going to do for you is they're going to inject part of an HTML file inside of your HTML. So you have an HTML file, and then you have just underneath the body tag, right? You might have a tag that says header, and you're going to inject all the header information in there from another file, right? So what that'll do is you can have one file, and you create something called a single page application, right, where you inject content in there into your page. You can also have many files, multiple files, and you can, instead of having a single page, you can have multiple pages. Yeah.
So we can get other stuff as well.
any files you want, anything, any data or files, HTML, XML, JSON data, anything you want inside your web page. And it'll be dynamic, and it'll be asynchronous. So basically, when your page loads, the stuff will load, right? And there's ways of making it more efficient and so on. When we use Ajax, before we talk too much more, when we use Ajax, one thing to note is that you will need to run a server once you run Ajax. There is no way of double-clicking anymore after this, right? You can't just double-click on your index.html and make it work, because Ajax requires you to use a server. All right, internal documentation the same, pretty much. And GitHub, I do need to make this live, so I'm going to ask you to add it to your GitHub pages, the one you have live already. You know, so this is another version of your mini portfolio site. It'll be assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, right? And yes, I'd like to see all of them separately, right? And so that way I can kind of mark all those when I come to that. But this part, assignment 3, is going to make your files more dynamic and interactive, as opposed to the way we've done it so far, where we just use static HTML and then we've repeated ourselves over and over again. Okay. All right, so that's really what this assignment's about, and it's worth 15%. It's 46 points inside of it, right? So that means it's like 3 points for every percent that you're going to get. So it's not a bad structure. And again, it's due a couple weeks from now. Any questions around assignment 3? This is what's happening. So JSON data and Ajax components due in a couple weeks. All right, so that's assignment 3. Okay, I don't prefer Sunday. Nice try. Anyways, so let's go to this. So I want to talk about Ajax, but I want to do a little bit of theory. We need to do some. I can't always do just pure coding, because I want to understand what the hell's going on. So let's talk about Ajax a little bit. So in our file, we have like chapter 11, updating web pages with Ajax. Ajax used to be called Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, because that's what it was, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. I just want you to think about it right now as Ajax. It's just a system, if you will, or it's something that's part of JavaScript that allows us to load files from a server, right? And we can also update stuff using JSONP. It's another way of doing it. We can also use Ajax to write to a database and a bunch of other stuff. And like I said, in our later weeks, like we're saying at week 10, probably when we do some extra topics, we're going to use Ajax, and I'll point out when we're using Ajax later on. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So again, it used to be called Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, not any longer. Please don't call it that, because that's not what it's only about. It's other things. So what we have is we create something called an HTTP or HTML XML HTTP request, or what we want to call an XHR object. All right. So this XHR object is the thing that we're going to use to activate Ajax. And I mean activate in that we're going to listen for, we're going to make a GET request from the server, and we'll talk about different kinds of requests we can make. Typically, there are 4 or 5 different kinds of requests that are very popular. One of them is a GET request. Okay, a GET request is when I go up on a server, as an example, and I say, hey, I want to see this page. Okay, I'm going to go into that in a second. So I have this client, and it talks to the server, and it makes this GET request. Okay, so it makes a request, and then it comes back with a response. So you have this idea of a request object and a response object. Request, response. And every time it comes back, the same client, when I make a request to the server serves up the URL, whatever the data is. So an example would be, I'm looking for my index.html. I make a request of the server. Do I have an index.html? The server says, yes, I do. Keep fine, serve it back, right? And that's the response. The response, it has a body, and the body is usually the page that it's returning. Okay, so pretty simple. So, so an example, we make a client request, and I start typing the word solar if I was going to look for solar panels as an example, or whatever in Google, and I make a client request, I start typing the word solar. Google is a great example of Ajax, right? Where it's actively, Ajax can be used for searching. Ajax can be used for injecting partial pages or updating part of your page real time. So an example of Google Maps uses Ajax, right? Because when you move Google Maps around, it loads different parts of the map as you're scrolling around and looking. So it loads parts of the data that you want as you work with the page, because the page is not unlimited size, right? It only has the data that you're looking for. So for example, if I have like a massive detailed map of the entire world, we may not need to look at every piece of that map all at once. We only need piece parts of that map, right? And so the only parts that it loads is the parts that you are looking for, right? And in this particular case, we can also use Ajax for searching and sorting. You'll actually pull up a list that matches what you're looking for in Google's database, okay? So there's some examples of how to use request response. Just gonna keep going. You can also use Ajax to connect to a web API. For example, things like the Google Maps API. API is Application Programming Interface, and usually big companies like Google and other places, they create something called this Application Programming Interface that you can tap into, and you can use Ajax to retrieve data in the form of JSON data, a JSON file, or it could be just simple text data from these services. A good example is the City of Toronto has a web API that you can get information from the city about different things, population details, demographics, and so on. And you need something called an API key that you sign up for a lot of times. And the API key is basically identifies who you are and what project you've created. And Facebook recently got into a problem with this, right? Remember Facebook? Facebook had all this like security problem where, I create a project on Facebook, a little application on Facebook, and I access it with my API key, and now I have access to all your contacts, right? That was true. That's how it worked. Literally anybody could do it, right? As long as I create a little project and it was an application, it would feed into a database, and if I was smart enough, and they were, I could literally scrape all of your contacts on Facebook. Everybody's contacts and everybody's information was open, right? Because of this API key. They've at least recently locked it down, and Facebook's done a pretty good job of fixing the problem. But for a long time, it was wide open. And there's other services like that. LinkedIn provides an API key. Google provides an API key. Different weather services provide API keys out there. There's tons and tons of stuff you can hook into. One of my favorite services to connect to is something called Firebase, right? Which you guys should totally look at. Firebase is a free serverless, service, if you will, up on Google. It's Google Firebase, and it provides things like authentication, NoSQL database, messaging, all kinds of stuff for free. And all you need is an API key to hook into it. Like, it's really that easy. Well, I'm making it sound easy, but actually the really good thing about that is you can connect things like your web page and all of your mobile apps all together. So your mobile apps like Android and iOS and your web page, everything connects through Firebase, and they share the same data. All right. Again, all this can be done. It could be accessed with something like an Ajax call. All right. So API keys. That's what APIs. You have to request an API key, and then what ends up happening is you connect to some kind of service or whatever, and the service provides data for you. Okay, that's what happens. All right, so different server software that is out there that you need to run, because remember, you need a server to run Ajax to make sure it works. IIS would be the one from Microsoft. Nginx, which is a popular node-based server. Apache, which runs PHP and all that kind of stuff. There's 3, and there's other ones out there. You can use a Java server. You can make a Python server. There's many servers you can make. So we have this HTTP request we're going to make, right? We're going to create this HTTP object. That's what it is. An HTML HTTP request object, or an XHR object. That's what it is. XHR object. I'll be okay. And this XHR object is going to send a request, and the server is going to respond with a response, and you're going to store that response in your code. The response is going to have some kind of text. Usually, it responds with a string. Okay, so you get back a string, and you can convert that string into JSON data. Right? In our case, we want to convert that string into HTML. All right, we can do both. We're going to do both HTML, and we're also going to parse the string into JSON, parse.json. Okay. So again, going back to that, we have your app initiates this XML HTTP request object, an XHR object, right? It sends, it connects to the server and checks to see if the server is okay. Does the server exist? You know, that's the first thing. What if you send a request somewhere and it doesn't exist and you're trying to get data? Your app will kind of crap out, right? You don't want that to happen. So there's these codes you're going to get back, okay, that are really going to tell you if everything is okay. If the data that you're connected to, or you're connecting to a server that's found and you're getting data that's valid, these things you need to kind of check, because you're actually doing some kind of messaging between your app, wherever your application is, and the server that you're connecting to. Some kind of messaging that you're sending back and forth. And it's usually in the form of request response, request response, request response, over and over again until you get the data that you want. The data comes at you in a stream, okay? So it doesn't come at you all at once like a big package. It comes at you slowly, 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 right? And then what ends up happening is it might take some time for you to download all the data that you want from your server. So again, if you look at this, sometimes what ends up happening is you might have another service that's outside of your server. So, you know, you make a request to the server itself connects to a database. Let's say this is a database or some other web service. The database responds to the server. The server in line responds to you and fills up your page with data. Okay, so this is an example of the whole stream where you have another server in place, right? So this is your web server, this first server, and it does this proxy request. The proxy request is almost like saying, you know, if I'm your proxy, that means I'm gonna be, you know, kind of representing you. That's what it's like. I'm your proxy, right? So a proxy server is really something that is going to exist so that you can connect to another server. It's going to act in your interests, if you will. Okay, so imagine the web server, you make a request to the web server, and the web server with some code makes a request of another server, right? And it acts in your interest. It kind of does what you want it to do and responds with data that comes back from the other server, right? It could be a service that I have that is data driven. And there could be other servers back here, not just this server, but maybe many servers that it connects to collate that data and come back and fulfill your request. And it'll fulfill your request with a response, a proper response. And that response will be in the form of text that you're going to get, that you're going to take and use some code to inject into your page. That's what's happening. So this request response system. And guys and girls, this is kind of a key because basically what's going to happen is when you use Node.js in the future, it also has this idea of a request response. And you're going to get a request object and a response object. So those are the two objects. So requests, some kind of, I'm asking a web server for something. Maybe it's a web page, maybe it's some other kind of data, and some kind of response from the web server. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this stuff. You guys should know all that. HTML, what HTML is. A host, format. I'm not going to really talk about this. So this is HTTP messages. This is actually really important. So whenever you set up a message, there's something called a message header that creates an HTTP page, right? So message headers include things like how the page is formatted. Is the format human readable? Is it HTML? Is it JSON? How the page is coming back at you, and so on. And usually it comes in this kind of format, some kind of start line. So you know, the request method or some kind of status, and the status that comes back is things like, hey, I found my page. It's a status 200. And we're going to talk about status messages in a second. What about if you don't find your page? It's a 404. That's a status number, a message that comes back and says, no, page not found, or data not found, right? Some kind of blank line, and then the message body comes back at you for your request. So you have this header idea. I'm not going to go into too much more detail. And there's a lot more detail in your book that I cannot capture. That's why the book is really good to have, because I can only cover maybe of the book, but I only scratch the surface of about 40% of it, right? There's other details in the book you can read if you're interested. But I got to cover, you know, kind of this idea of how this whole thing works. So most common methods are get and post, but both of those methods, get and post, is a request. I'm making two kinds of requests. I can do get and post. Those are very common request types, right? And other ones are delete, put. Those are ones I've used many, many times, where delete, as an example, removes something. I want to remove a piece of data from a database. I want to update. Put means update. Typically, that's what it normally does. And there's other ones that are listed here as well. But get and post. So a good example of a get request. So it's a type of request, right? I have a request response, right? A get request says, I want to get the data from a web page. I want to see my web page. I want to see my login page, right? So if I have a login page and I say, okay, I want to go to this login page. I go to login.html, right? I make a get request. And the server responds with the package that shows my get.html, my login.html page. Okay, that's the get request. And then I fill out the login. I put my username and password or whatever, and I press login, the login button. And now from that same page, going to the same URL, login.html, I make a post request. I'm processing the page, right? And that's usually a post request. And the post request goes out to the server and says, hey, look, Tom is logging in with his username and password. We can authorize him to, you know, view this page. We're going to authenticate him. It's really Tom, username, password, and we're going to authorize him, authentication versus authorization, right, to view this page, the one that he's looking for. Okay, so different things when it comes to security. Authentication means I know it's you. It's identity. Who are you, right? And authorization is what can you do, right? So what are you able to do? And you can do that with get and post requests. And then when I'm on the page, as an example, I want to update the database. I want to add a new contact in my database, as an example. And I can do that by, again, I can make a get and post request. I can get an edit page. An edit page that comes up says edit contact or add new contact, right? That's the get request. And then when I add the new contact, I click add. That's the post request. And then it does the data, it processes the data and comes back. If I want to delete a contact, I can make a delete request. And if I want to update the contact, I can make a put request. These are all kinds of requests that come up to the server. The server has to know how to deal with them. And usually, if you're coding it, especially on Node.js, we code all those things. We make sure that when we get different kinds of requests, we can respond to them. Okay? All right, so there's two methods of posting, getting and posting, and you get different stuff back. One thing to know here is whenever a couple of things that are on this page that are important to know when it comes to HTTP requests is the idea of a host. So who hosts the URL that you're on? So if I'm going to google.com, that's the host, right? And if I send a user agent is the type of browser that's accessing the URL. So a good example of that, every browser that exists, whether on your machine or on your iPad, some tablet, on your iPhone or Android device, right, as an example, it has something called a user agent string, right? And the user agent string identifies the kind of browser that's accessing that URL. So why is that important? Why am I even talking about it? Because if I can identify what browser is accessing my data, and if it's a mobile browser, I know that it's a mobile device, and that means I can respond to a mobile device request over a desktop request. I can actually spin different kinds of data to different kinds of devices based on the user agent string. So if I have my user agent string that says, hey, I'm a Mac, all right? And I have a user agent string that says, hey, I'm a Windows machine. I can spin different kinds of data to both machines. And a good example of that is if you go and download something that's cross-platform that you can download for Windows and Mac, it detects that you're a Mac or you're a PC. How does it do that? User agent string. It says, I'm running Google, and I'm running Google on a PC. That's what that is. The refer is when I click a link to go to a particular site. I know the referring host that sent me there. So a lot of times, let's say if I'm coming from one website and going to another, I have a referrer that's referring my request to go to that server. And this is really important when it comes to things like search engine optimization, and other kinds of completions that you want to kind of monitor on a particular, from an analytics perspective. You want to know that when, you know, that big button that's in your main website that's asking the user to go to this site, people are clicking it because they're coming from that place to go to this site. You can actually know what's referring your data, right? Which is kind of cool. So that's HTTP requests. There's more, different kinds of content encoding and a bunch of other stuff that we're not going to cover today. Again, this is stuff for you to kind of look at if you're interested. All right, so when you make an HTTP request, you get a response, and usually you get a status code in the form of some kind of code number, right? So some kind of one something means that you receive the request. The server, you make a request, the server responds with, hey, I got your request. Some kind of 100x kind of response, right? And if I respond with a success, if it's successful, it means that whatever you're looking for is good, right? Like you're looking for index.html and it exists. I'm going to respond with a 200, right? So a 200 request says, hey, I got your request. The page does exist. It's a 200. Everything is okay, right? And then if you do a 404, if it's a 404 error, you're looking for a page that doesn't exist, I'm going to come back with a 404 status 404, meaning it's an error. I got some kind of error. And there's also a other kinds of 300 requests, the same things like, nothing's changed. There's actually some code, a 304, that's basically saying things like, hey, there's nothing has changed, right? Or, you know what, I need some other thing that you need to do. And there's also a 500, it's not listed here, but a 500 request like a server error. You might get that as well, 500 something, which is a server error that basically says, hey, the server is in trouble. Something happened with the server, you're not getting a response, right? So different kinds of status codes come back when you make a request. And those status codes, a lot of times, of course, we ignore them because we don't know what they mean, right? But the XML HTTP request, the XHR object, can actually capture those kinds of status codes, right? So I make a request, I get a status code back. And I'm always looking for a 200, always. A 200 request means request received and everything is okay. I'm good. It's successful. Okay, so here's some common ones. A 200, okay. A 304, something that's not modified, like I talked about. A 304 request is like, I'm accessing some CSS, and I've already got the CSS cached in my file. Thank you very much. Nothing's changed, right? So if I keep accessing the same CSS file, if I just keep reloading the same page, if I click reload, I get back a 304 because you've accessed everything you had before. Yeah. Do I want to do what? You're going to do that today. We're going to talk about how to do that. We're going to do that today. We need to monitor the requests. We know that the server, that what we're requesting actually exists, right? So 500 is a server error, an internal server error, typically 404. These are very common errors. And typically 301 and 302s, as an example. I don't see that too much. The most common ones that I see a lot are 200s, 304s, 404s, and 500s. Okay, that's the kind of numbers we get back. And those are very common. You've seen them all. All of you guys have seen that kind of stuff, right, in one shape or another. All right, so I get this response, and I get the location object, which connects and has the member of the location object includes the actual URI information from the server. And the key to all this is this XML HTTP request object, or an XHR object that we're going to create, okay? And there's some common methods that are associated with this object, okay? So some of them are, and I think the main one we're going to use is open, okay? The open is going to mean we're going to use the method. What kind of method are we going to open the request with? Typically, it's a GET request, okay? So I use a GET request to open up, and it's going to be capital GET, G-E-T, capital G-E-T, and we're going to use the URL, whatever it is, okay? So the URL could include something like headers.html. That could be the file that I'm trying to get, okay? And then you can specify whether you want to use async or not. Sometimes we don't want it to be asynchronous. We want it to be synchronous. And the difference between asynchronous and synchronous is synchronous waits, right? So it's blocking. So I block all other requests until I load up my other stuff. That's synchronous. Sometimes you want to do that because you need to load some kind of data. For example, if I'm loading game stuff, I don't want to make it asynchronous because that means that part of my game is loaded and the other part hasn't. Right? I want to load everything first, all my stuff, and then play my game, right? So sometimes I want a synchronous request. Again, it's a kind of a contrived example here, and there's other ways of doing it with asynchronous loading as well. But I'm just trying to make this a point. You can also pass in username and password information because sometimes your XML HTTP request object, it connects to a server that needs authentication, right? For example, a login, right? As something like that, right? Or some other thing like an API key or whatever. And then you're going to make a send request. By the way, a lot of times we leave that send object empty, right? I'm serious. We just like say, so XML, we create an XML object, we open a request, we kind of do an open request, and then we send the data, to just basically when we say send, it actually creates the request. Okay, and we can send content or not. And the content we send is an argument a lot of times that we can respond on the other end. Notice that there is a get response header and a set request header. Those kinds of things can be used to further parameterize the kind of request that we're making. Now, this is really important, okay? So whenever we connect to a server, we're going to listen if the server is ready. Okay, so there's two parts. We're going to listen for the ready state. Okay, so on ready state change, when it goes from a 100 type request to a 200 request, we're listening for a 200. When it comes back from the server saying, "Hey, I'm ready to send data now," that means I've connected somehow to the server through the internet. A lot of times, and sometimes it takes a few milliseconds. So we've connected, and it comes back. We are creating an event listener, just like we do a button click, right? We're listening for the server to come back with, "Hey, I'm ready." Okay. Once I'm ready, you know what? That's great. That's fantastic. And the ready state, there's a bunch of ready states here. 0 is uninitialized. So 1 is open, 2 is sent, 3 is receiving, 4 is loaded. So I'm waiting for 4, ready state 4, and a response or status of 200. So I'm looking for 200 and a ready state of 4. Why? That means that I was able to find the server on that end, and guess what? I got all my data, right? Because what happens is it goes through this state where I'm receiving data in a stream. That's a ready state of 3, right? If I'm still receiving data and then I load my page, I'm going to have maybe part of my page loaded with data and the other part is broken, right? We don't want that. I want to receive all my data first and then bash the page with it. That's what I want to do. Okay, so I'm going to listen for that kind of request. The state, a ready state of 4 and a status of 200 is what I'm always looking for. If I get a status of 404, then I'm going to stop my ready state. I don't care about loading data if I can't find my object. So first, I really want to check out, hey, what's my ready state, right? And then what's my status? Is my status 200? And if it is, then I'm going to check my ready state. All right, so again, making a new XML HTTP request object is as simple as doing this, using the new keyword, using the constructor notation to create a new object that exists inside JavaScript. There's nothing for you to load or no plugin you have to use. It's part of JavaScript, okay? What was that? Yes, not var. And here's some more examples. Here's a function as an example that is using a try catch. So some error handling, right? And sometimes here's something that happens. We wrap our try around this XML HTTP request object because sometimes, depending on the version of JavaScript, it doesn't exist. Like earlier versions of JavaScript didn't have an XML HTTP request. So they wrapped it inside of this try catch. For us, who cares? It doesn't matter because our versions of JavaScript all have an XHR object. All right. Modern versions of ECMAScript 5, even ECMAScript 3, a lot of times they have XML HTTP request objects. You can make that. All right. So when I create the object, I don't have to do this try catch. Okay. It used to be that, it's a good practice to do this because basically things like your browser does not support this content, right? Like if you have an older browser, right? So because the XML HTTP request didn't support Ajax at all. There wasn't Ajax supported. I can't remember a time recently where any modern browser doesn't support Ajax. So you don't need to try catch. So you make a call. Again, you this idea of, I'm not going to read that, but basically what happens is you make a call and you get this JSON object back. Let's say you're looking for a JSON file. I'm reading this JSON file. Notice that this looks like JavaScript, but it's not. Yes?
JSON can handle only text data.
Well, this is all data here. No, it can handle all kinds of data. But here's an example of a JSON file.
Even the images, etc.
Not really. But JSON can handle things like SVGs, right? So you can be creative. How about that? And load image data from JSON, right? But you'd rather load image data from bitmaps, like actual images, not JSON data. But here's an example of an address book. An address book it's an array of different objects. That's what this address book is. Let's zoom in here a little bit. So you can see this. Whoa, that was too fast. So here's an address book example. Oh, there we go. So if you notice that you start JSON with a curly brace, and then look at this, you have a colon. This means property, right? Like we've seen before, right? It's like making an object in JavaScript, right? We have a property name, address book, and then what is it? It's an array. An array of what? Array of objects. These objects each have a name and an email address. The name is a property that's in this object. Now, think about this. I can make my own class called, contact. My contact class could have name and email, right? And it'll be I can actually inject objects of type contact, right? Different contacts that I have, as an example, inside of my address book, okay? And it takes name and email. So what this is doing is I can decouple the object here with name and email, and I can use each of these entries inside of my array of objects to inject into an array that's inside of my code. So this is the actual data that's stored inside JSON. So JSON is a format to actually pass data or information from let's say a server, to you. And it's the most popular format ever. It's more popular now than XML. XML used to be the de facto standard for passing data around, and now for the most part, and XML is still being used in other places, but for the most part, JSON is the standard way we receive data from a server. Okay, we don't usually receive, and it's formatted this way. Okay, so even though it's text, that's what we get it as text. If it's JSON, we can parse a text file and understand that it's JSON, and we can receive this as an object of type address book that has which is an array, and that has different objects inside of it. Okay, so this is a good example of a JSON file. So questions around JSON data. JSON data is what we're going to be handling a lot more. And with your assignment number 3, what I want you to do is create your own JSON file, your paragraphs.json file, that will include all the stuff that you're going to inject back into your page. So remove it from your assignment number 1 and 2, the way you had it. Keep assignment 1 and 2 the way it is, because I want to mark it still. When you make assignment number 3, right, I want you to make a copy of your project from assignment 1 and 2, or actually from 2 to 3, right? And the stuff that you're injecting into your page and your paragraphs, put that into your paragraphs.json file. And you're going to use Ajax to load that stuff back up. Okay? So that's really, that's how a JSON file looks like. We're going to make a request with Ajax. We're looking for a ready state. And again, what we want is to make this open. You can specify get or post. Get, again, is if I'm downloading. Post is if I'm sending. I can make a post type request if I want to send information through Ajax to the server, right? And a good example is this: I want you to process the page kind of thing. That's the kind of request I'm going to make. So this is how the get request would look. It would say something like, so here's my HTTP object here, right? And get HTTP object is actually a function that was defined earlier, right? It just creates that thing and uses error handling so to make sure that the XML HTTP object exists, right? Which it does through using modern browsers. And then you're going to make this open request, and you're going to use the get and then some kind of URL. And notice it says true because this means we're using asynchronous data. That's what async means. True. By default, it's true, by the way. So we're going to have these arguments as an example, right? And then other optional arguments are username and password, like we talked about. Let's see if I can go on to stuff we haven't covered already. We talked about synchronous versus asynchronous. And this idea of the send method, it completes the request. Okay, that's what I want you to think about. So you open the request, and then you send to complete the request. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, I want to get some example code for you. Let's get more example code.
You also make methods with send message, right?
Sorry?
Using a different send message.
Yes, you could. Like, for example, here I can send some data back to the server that basically says, hey, send this information to the server. But here's an example of a send request. Normally we have null, and you can actually leave this blank as well. But yes, you could. You could do that. You can make a callback for your send. But anyways, if you look at this, so you have your HTML object, you have your open and your send. But remember there's a piece missing here, which is, hey, is the server ready? If the server's not ready, all this stuff's going to fail, right? We don't want to inject stuff from the server unless we have everything ready. And I'm just going to skip down to where we get that information. I'm not going to read this. This is for you to read. Because, okay, so this is what we're going to get, some kind of response. There's two kinds of properties. We can response XML, and there's also a response.json. We talked about ready state, where 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't care about 0, 1, 2, 3. We care about 4. That's the main one. If we don't have the request complete, that means the data is not downloaded, right? And we can use this idea. If we can say that if, sorry, it's bouncing around because I've changed the size. Let me just go back to that. If my request.readyState is equal to 4, that means I'm ready to do stuff. So I can use this request. Now they're using an onReadyStateChange object. This is the event listener, but of course I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use add event listener ready state change. That's what it's going to be. And then I'm going to use a function like this. And inside the function, I'm going to check to see that the request object that I'm getting is a good example of that is I'm going to get a ready state of 4. Okay, so hey, I'm ready to go. I've got this the stuff that you want from the server. And again, we talked about this idea of status codes. And we want to layer this. We want to kind of say something like, I want to see if it's here. So here's a request.response text. Remember response text we talked about? I can output the response text when I get my request.readystate is equal to 4 and my request.status is 200. I need both those two things. Let me just zoom in there so you can see that. This is almost like the code you need, almost exactly the code we need to make our object work. Okay, let's do some coding. I think this is where I want to stop. There's more information here in the page. Notice that there's 84 pages here in this PowerPoint. I'm not going to go through the entire PowerPoint because, again, it's for you to read, not for me. But one thing I want you to look at is this kind of setup. Okay, this setup. Okay, let's do it. So let me go back to here. Here we are in code now. And I want to think about how I'm going to set this up. So first of all, let's do what I said I was going to do. I want to kind of read some information from my HTML object, right? We're going to get into JSON in a second, all right? So I'm going to start with HTML first. How do I read HTML? First of all, like I said in your assignment number 3, this is exactly what you need for assignment number 3, so please take a look, okay? I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this folder views, okay? Now, when you look at the folder capital V, any capital folders, capital V, capital C, capital S, capital A for assets, scripts, views, and content as a good example, right? Usually these are folders on the root level, okay? I'm making a views folder because I'm trying to follow something that we use something called a model view controller pattern, okay? Now, if you've never heard about model view controller pattern, think about your views, right, as the screens that you see. All right, so things that the user is going to see. The views are almost like your HTML pages. Okay, that's your view. Think about the model as a set of classes that connect to this to a database, as an example, right? And think about the controllers as a set of JavaScript or other kinds of program code that connects and works between the model that connects to the database as a proxy and the view. It actually fills the view with data. All right, so that's what the controller does. All right, so this idea of model view controller is a pattern, right? MVC is what it's called. It's a very popular pattern out there. It's being used by, of course, most modern web application frameworks these days. Angular is a good example of a framework that uses MVC. We're only going to make the V of MVC today. Okay, V is, we're going to create the views for us. Okay, we're not touching model. We're not touching the controllers. Our controller is actually our app.js. That's really our controller, if you think about it. We do have a controller, but it's in the form of our app.js. And what I want to do is I want to create, inside my views folder, I want to create 2 more folders. One of them is going to be called partials. And again, we may not be able to complete this today, but we're going to try. And another folder we're going to make is going to be called content. All right, so notice that there's content and then there's content down inside views. There's 2 different folders. So content views, right, are going to be where I'm going to store my content. For example, my index.html. I might have certain content for my index.html inside there. And I'm going to have my partials folder. And in my partials folder, I'm going to have 2 other files. One of them is going to be called header.html. And the other one is going to be called footer.html. Let's do that. So make 2 new files, header.html. And let's put a footer.html in place. New file, footer.html. Okay, so header and footer. Right now they're empty. And just to show you this, in the header, all right, let's just put in a tag, a div tag, right, as an example. So in the header, we're going to put a div tag, right, and we're going to make a class of header. That's something like this, something very simple, okay? I want to load this div tag with a class of header, right? I want to load this up into my files, right? So I have some kind of data. My footer right now is empty. Who cares about that? But I just want to work with one file at a time, and then we'll expand this as we go, okay? Right now, there's nothing in my content. I've just created my structure. And this, by the way, this structure is what I'm looking for your assignment number 3. All right, so please modify your code, add a views folder, add a partials folder, and you may or may not want to use the content folder. I made it an option. So I didn't make it a requirement in your assignment 3. All right, there's nothing to change here in my index.html. Okay, nothing to change right now. I'm just going to use my app.js to do everything. Okay, so I'm going to go into my scripts, my core, in my app.js. And inside there, I want to, for now, I want to make a global or a local, if you will, object called XHR. Okay, that's what it is, XHR object. Okay, we're just going to call it XHR. It doesn't have anything. You can just, right now, it's just nothing. It's just a variable that's any, right, of type any. In my start, yep. You want to ask something, or you good? In my start method, the first thing I want to do is I want to instantiate an XHR object, just like we normally do inside our codes. We're going to say that XHR is equal to a new XML HTTP request. Yeah.
I don't have app.
Sorry?
The one you had, I don't have app.
You should if you look up online.
Yeah.
So if you go back to the PowerPoint, all I'm doing is, are you sure? App.js should be inside of your
Core, right?
core. Yeah. No?
Did you download it from GitHub?
Yeah.
That's
It's there
weird.
for me.
Yeah, it's there. If you look back at the, I'll correct that in a second as well. Give me a second. So if you look way back up here, where we started off our XML HTTP request, there is a piece of code that we used. And I'm just going to expand this so I can see them. So when we start first talking about all this stuff, there is a piece of code that we created, a function that has that example, which is right here. This is the function, get request object, right? And basically what we did was this, we talked about this using a try catch. We don't need a try catch, but we do need this XML HTTP request object. This is what we need, right? And this is what we've injected here, XML HTTP request. So this doesn't do anything immediately. Right now, it's just an object, right? And if I was to save this, and if I press, control backtick, right, and write light server, right, we should not get any kind of error. Oh, we have extra stuff we have to get rid of. I forgot about that stuff. Of course, we added some other things to make our little ranged max range, and so on, right? We have our class of row with a mid-range and max range. There's our template. We're just going to get rid of all this. Bye-bye. And same thing goes with, that's inside of our div tag with an alert, the buttons, roll button. Yeah, we probably get rid of all this too.
Line, starting at line.
Yeah, so we're basically inside of our Jumbotron right now. I just got rid of all that stuff. So you should have something that looks like this. Sorry, I forgot to do that. And yeah, right, it's kick. I just cleaned it up. So you don't have any of that stuff. It's just all you have is an H1 tag right now. All right, so cool. So we have our header. Here's our header. Eventually what I want to do is take this entire header and then all this navigation information, and I want to put it into a file. But for now, what I want to do is I don't want to inject anything in our index.html. I just want to use it to connect to my app.js. And if I go back to this and if I go to inspect, what I should get in my console is no errors. Now what it says here, it says XML HTTP request. So you notice I made a mistake, right? This is good. So that means in my app, I didn't name it properly. It's XHML. It's XML HTTP request. That's what this is, right? And if now you can see that my app started. Okay, we're good to go. All right, so XML HTTP request is this XHR. That's why I don't want to keep doing this all the time. I just want to call it XHR. That's what it is, right? And we've initialized that with our when start. So in main, when we call main now, I can create an event listener, right, that listens for my XML .onReady state change, right? So we can say something like xhr.add event listener, right? And we're listening for the ready state change object. We're going to make a anonymous function like we normally do. That's inside here. And what I want to do here is I want to check to see if, right, the ready state, so the XHR, this object, and then we want to look at for two things, right? If we go back, there's state, there's ready state, right, and status. That's what we're looking for. So if I go back to the PowerPoint, I'm just pointing this out so you can know where to find it if you're looking for it and you don't know where it is. I know some of you are going to go, you're going to look for it, and then you're not going to find it. It's right here. And then you're going to go, I don't know where that code is, Tom, or you're going to look for the video, and you're not going to know where to look in the video. But here's an example. So my request is this XML HTTP request, right? And on ready state change is what I've done is I've made add event listener instead of this, right? And inside there, I'm going to say my XML or XHR.ready state. So I'm going to say if XHR.ready state, right, is exactly equal to or is equal to 4, right? So that's what this is, exactly equal to 4 with triple equal. We want to make sure it's exactly equal because we don't want some other funky thing happening, right? So that's the first one. And that, I'm going to surround this whole thing. I actually use extra brackets for order of operations, yes?
How do you define it?
Up here. I did it here. I said XHR is equal to a new XML HTTP request. And I just created a kind of an object up here. I said, we're going to create an object called XHR. In our start, we're going to initialize that object. And in our main, we're going to check for it. All right? So the first one is I want to see if the ready state is 4. That's the first one I want to do. And I want both these things to be true. The ready state is going to be 4, and there's my and. I use a logical and operator, right? XHR.status, notice the status, which is right here. XHR.status is exactly equal to 200. So everything is okay, plus all your data has loaded. I'm ready to go now. Yes?
What's the difference?
Okay. So the double ampersand means that I'm making an AND operation. I'm using a logical AND operation. The single ampersand is a bitwise operator. It actually shifts bits to the right, as an example, or it actually does a logical addition. It adds, binary. It's a binary addition, kind of operation. So if I say, like, if I have a number and then I AND it with something else, I'm actually saying that the bits that make up the number or the character or whatever, if they're all 1 bits, for both values. So for example, if I have a number that's 01011, right, and I add it to 0100, then the result is only the ones that are both ones are that come up in the result, right? And it'll be all 0000 at the end, because basically 1 and 0, they have to both be true in order for it to be true, right? And 1 and 0 is not both are true. That means the final result is going to be 0, right? That's what it does. It does basically instead of a logical comparison, what it does is it compares bits, bit shifting, if you will, right? And if you haven't, you should have learned that in C# and that kind of stuff, because it's available in C#, in Java, and in C++, actually. So this is not something that's new.
We are still in JavaScript.
Yes, so that means that a single AND means that you would have to do bit shifting, right? Now, that means that if, let's say, for example, I'm ANDing an A character with a B. I have an A character, and I'm put a single AND and a B. What I'm actually doing is I'm saying, hey, what's that A character translate to from an ASCII perspective? It translates to something like 65. That's an A, right? And what's a B? 66. And if I add A and B together from a bits perspective, only the ones that are both turned on both sides end up coming through in the end. I don't know what I get when I add A and B, by the way. I'm just saying, right? So a good example of that, if I have like a number, like a 4-bit piece of code, right, that says something like, I don't know, 1011, like I said, right? And then the other one is over here, I have 1000, right? The first one is 1 and 1, so you get a 1, and the other ones are ignored. They're all zeros, because I don't care about the other ones. Only the ones that are both, they have to be turned on, or they have to be positive or true on both sides. And if you want to, if you stick around later, I'll go through it with you, the operation, how it works. Oh yeah, it's used for other things. It's used to calculate certain things, but typically not. Yeah, it's usually used in low-level programming, C as a good example, or even assembly. Right? Sometimes we use it for other things, because what we do is we want to detect, certain things are happening. In Unity, they use it a lot. Bitwise operators they use in Unity. Okay, excuse me. So let's move on. So that's this part. So ready state of 4 and logical and request.status is equal to 200. So xhr.status is exactly equal to 200. Those are the two things we want. If those two things are correct, then what I want to do is I want to do a console.log, and I want to say that the xhr response text, I want to output that object. Okay, that's what I want to do. Whatever that I'm getting back from my response. Okay, so a good example of that is if you look back here, my request.response text is what I'm outputting. Okay, but one thing to note is this event listener is never going to trigger unless I make a request. I haven't made a request. I've just set up an event listener right now. That's all I've done. Okay, so I've set up the event listener to respond to a request. Okay, so here's my request. I can say that xhr.open, and in my open, I want to kind of detail what I want to open. I want to open a GET request, and I want to look at a specific location for the data. So I'm using a GET request, and I'm looking for a specific location for the data. And if I look inside my code, I'm looking inside views, partials, header.html. Okay, that's where it's going to be. So again, I'm going to go /views /partials /header.html. That's just the path. Now, I may or may not want to add in true. I don't care right now. It is asynchronous. I'm going to leave it as is. That's the only thing I need right now. And to finish it off, to complete the request, I need xhr.send. That's it. That's the pieces that I need. I need an XHR object. I need an event listener that basically listens for ready state 4 and status of 200, right? I need an open, and I need a send. Those are the things I need. Those are all the steps I need. So if I was going to detail the steps here for a second, this is kind of like step 1. So Step 1, I need to put this in there for you so you understand, right? Create a variable, an XHR variable. Okay, that's what I need. The first one, that's step 1. Step 2 would be this. Step 2, right? Initialize or instantiate. We'll say instantiate on XML HTTP request object. Right? That's what we're doing. That's what this is. This is step 2. Okay? And then once we instantiate it, step 3 is set up an event listener. Step 3, set up an event listener handler, because we're doing both in one here, that listens for a ready state change and requires the ready state code to be 4, and the status to be 200. We need those two things. Okay, if we don't have 4 and 200, something's wrong. Either it's not found, the page is not found, or the ready state is we haven't connected or downloaded from our file. So what this is doing is saying, hey, make a request. This has to be right, and this has to be right, right? In order for me to get the request. So the response text is the data that I'm getting back. So this is the data that I'm getting back. So response text is the data we are receiving from the server. Okay, that's the form it's taking in response text. That's what we're getting back. Okay, and then this is really step 4. So step 4, create or use the open method of the XHR object to send a, let's say, a GET request. You can be other type of requests as well, right? And you need to send the URL information. Okay, you can't do that. You can't just say and nothing. That has to go somewhere. Okay, so this second part, the first part is what type of request, and the second part is where you're looking for. Where are you looking for that request? And then to complete the request, step 5, complete the request with the send method. And that's what you need to do. That's step 5. And that's everything you need for Ajax, every single time. It's going to take some kind of form like this. That's another thing. This is just we're just getting the data right here. This is the data we want to get, right? So let's see if it worked. Okay, the first thing is we talked, but we don't even know if it worked, right? So let's see what we got. So we go back, and if I go back to this, I can see that I got div class header div. Where did that come from? The file. That's where this came from. Hey, guys, if I have this, I can inject this as inner HTML or append child this to anything I want. And this is the key that we need to set up our navigation. Why is that? All right.
So the only server we have is light server.
Well, you can use whatever server you want, right? But you can use a WAMP server. There's other servers you can use to test with. You want to use a WAMP server, right? WAMP server you can download. It's from some French company that created WAMP server, right? Like in France, French, that kind of thing. They have some English instructions. It's not so difficult to download. But basically what you do is you download WAMP server. It's a local download, right? So if you go to download, right, what you can do is under download, you can download either a 64-bit or a 32-bit server. I recommend the 64-bit if you're going to go this way. And what it does is it downloads and installs an Apache, PHP, and MySQL server. So an AMP server. There's different forms of AMP, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. WAMP, Windows, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. XAMPP, X, some kind of thing, Apache, and PHP. It's actually a server. And there's also MAMP, right? Mac, Apache, and MySQL, and PHP. You can download all these different kinds of servers, and it's a local development server that you can use to test that your Apache, MySQL, and PHP work. Okay? However, we're not using PHP, so that doesn't make any sense. We're actually using a node server. Our Light-server is a little portable node server that we're using to test this stuff out with. Okay, that's what we're actually using. So that's one thing. Yes?
I see your line.
29?
Oh, you know, I guess it's the internet comments.
Yeah, okay, so it's here. It's here.
It was your event listener.
Yeah, this is all this is. Yeah. I'm going to put this up online in a second. Let me just put it up online here. So I'll say added Ajax example. Yeah, that's all I've done, right? So you can see that that is the first example we're going to do with Ajax. So this is just setting up Ajax. And guys and girls, it's like literally that easy, right, when it comes to Ajax, okay? Now, you might look at it and go, that's it? And yeah, that's it. It's just understanding this, the way things go. I have to say that when we use Jquery, and one day we're going to use Jquery, in fact, maybe what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about Jquery. We've been avoiding Jquery this entire time. I told you that Jquery is pretty much not used as much anymore because CSS can handle a lot of the stuff that Jquery used to be able to do. Yeah.
Could we define what ready state is?
This?
HR.ready state.
Ready state is part of the XHR object.
Right. What it's saying is it's not.
Yeah, well, in ready state capital S, you mean? It shouldn't say that. It shouldn't say that, right? It shouldn't tell you that it's not defined. Go take a look at my code online. All right, so again, we've done an XHR open and an XHR send as an example, and this is the way we do that with JavaScript, okay? But we've basically looked into our footer.html, or sorry, header.html file, which is this, and we've read this thing from the file, and now it outputs to here. See, this is the stuff we've outputted. So we've taken the file and output it here. So here's the file, here's the output. File, output. Well, nice, but what if we kind of inject it on a page? That's what we really want. And let's make a more complete example. So now I'm going to take a really big step. I'm going to delete my navigation completely, right? And I'm going to add it into my file, inside my in my code. But I want to be, kind of strategic here. And I recommend this for your assignment number 3. Maybe I'm going to inject other kind of stuff. I'm not going to just inject my, my navigation. Maybe I'm going to inject my footer. Maybe I'm going to inject something else, like my content, right? So I want to inject whatever I want, and I want a tag that I'm going to target to inject into, right? So this brings about an idea for a function. Instead of doing it the way I've done it, what if I had a function, and we'll make it something like, I don't know, somewhere above start. We'll put it like right here. So this is our new function. And we'll make this function called something like, insert HTML. I want to insert HTML. Let's do that. Insert. So my new function is going to be called insert HTML. It's going to take 2 things, right? What do I want to insert? And the tag that I'm inserting, right? So I need definitely some kind of tag, a target of where I'm inserting the HTML. What's my target? Okay. I think this is important to understand the target of where I'm inserting it into the code, right? Almost like my, the target that's inside of my page, right? And then the URL, right? The source of where I'm getting the HTML I'm going to insert. So I got my source and my target, right? I could also put it the other way around. I want to kind of put it like source and destination, right? You can also call it that as well. Or, so here's my destination. So we'll call it destination, source, and destination. That makes more sense to you? I have my source and my destination, right? Destination is going to be where I'm going to inject the stuff in the code in the page. Source is where I'm getting the stuff to inject. Okay. So my source then is going to be my URL, right? And my destination or my target is going to be the tag. So I want to do something like this. I want to say destination, right, is going to be equal to, and again, it's the type of tag that I'm looking for, where I'm going to be inserting it. For example, it could be the ID, you know, of where I'm inserting it. So I could do something like document.getElement by ID, you know. I can create that almost like my target, if you will. I can say that let's let target, I'm just coding this up in my head here, is equal to document.getElement by ID and then destination. The destination is going to be where, which tag it's going to be, right? And maybe that's what we want to say, like, you know, kind of, this is my source. Instead of my source, we'll call it source URL, make it more descriptive. And then destination will be my destination tag, right? Where it's going to go. What tag am I looking for? And usually want to do, because I'm using get element by ID, right? Maybe it's going to be destination ID. Okay, if that makes sense. So I'll call this destination ID. Big name, like a kind of a file. So destination ID. Let's just change this destination ID. So we're kind of good. So our target then is is kind of a reference to the destination ID that I've put in. Makes sense? So I got my source URL, destination ID, and I get a reference to the target. So now I know where I'm targeting. Okay, I've got a reference to that target element, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It could be a footer, header, whatever, right? And then I want to do my Ajax request. I have this XHR object, but I want to reuse it. I don't want to create a new one every time, right? I just want to keep using it by making different requests, right? I have this event listener, right? But this event listener shouldn't be here, right? Shouldn't be my main. And neither should this open and send. This open and send of these steps 3, 4, and 5, they should be inside that function. So I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to put this all inside here. Okay. So what it's going to do is ready state change is going to trigger, right? On ready state, I want to pull out the you know, kind of this information. But I want this XHR response text. I want it to be the inner HTML, right, of my object that I'm looking at. So whatever my target is going to be, it's going to look something like this. It's going to say that, hey, once I got the target, I'm going to get a reference to the target from my destination ID. I want to say that the inner HTML of the target, right, is going to be equal to the XHR response text. So I'm getting text, and I'm going to make this the inner HTML, or I could say target.appendChild, however you want to do it. Okay. I'm still going to print this out for now, just so that we can confirm what we're getting is what I'm asking for. Okay. And this is just for injecting HTML. Okay. That's what I'm doing here. All right. So I've done this, and I'm getting this open request. Now this can't be, right? This is going to be the source URL. So this is where that source URL is going to go, down in here. So source URL, because I don't want to always have a fixed URL. I'm going to have different places that I'm looking, right, for this function to work, right? So I'm making a generic function. So when I get my source URL, right, it's going to make the request, a GET request of that source URL, and it's going to inject the response, whatever the response text is, into the target. Okay, guys and girls, this is what you need for your assignment 3. Giving you what you need, right? Kind of. All right, so I'm covering this part right here, and let's see how this works. So down in here where I use it in my main, I want to inject or insert HTML somewhere. So I'm going to use my insert HTML function. Insert HTML. It needs some kind of source and a destination ID. Okay, so my source, that's the URL, /views, /partials, header.html. So it is, right? And then my destination ID, some kind of ID that I'm going to inject the code. Let's put one in. So in my index.html, inside my Jumbotron, as an example, let's put some a div tag right now, just for a test, that we're going to call test. Okay, so this is where it's going to go. This is the destination. Okay, and in my header, instead of using this, I'm just going to put some simple text, like something like, you know, hello world. You can put whatever you want in here. It'll just be interpreted as HTML, right? Whatever you want in your text. I'm going to take this. Oops. I'm going to take my ID called test. That's what I'm looking for. And actually, I did it wrong. So the ID is called test. That's the ID. Notice that it's a string because I'm looking for an ID, and I'm using this get element by ID. So that it has to be a string. This has to be a string. This has to be a string. Okay. And then I'm going to get the target object is going to use the string to get a reference to the target. We did this wrong. This should be, instead of a class, it should be an ID in this particular case. If I was going to use class, I have to make it so it's get element by class name, or get tag by class name, or get tag, whatever I want. There's different ways of, remember, two different ways of selecting that particular ID. Okay. But now we have this test area, and it's going to print out, you know, kind of like a some kind of hello world. It's going to be very small. Okay, so let's try this out, and I'm going to save this one. And now that I've saved everything, if I did everything right, then we should get hello world. Here's hello world, and we're ejecting it right here. Okay? Yes?
Where is the XCR now open game called? After the method.
I'll put this up online for you. I'll put this up online so you can see it. But I'll explain it in a second again. I'll go through it one more time, right? Because I want to make sure you guys are good with it, right? So I'll say I added insert HTML function. That's what I did. And I'll push that up. So you can see that. So it's inside the insert HTML function when it comes up in a second. It's there now. So where is that? Let's take a look at it together. So inside of my insert HTML, there's a lot of comments. I'm sorry about the comments. I just wanted to make sure it's easier for you to track it. But inside the comments, there is, you've got your target, whatever your get element by ID is. You've got your add event listener with a ready state change, with a ready state of 4 and a status of 200. I'm outputting to the console what I'm seeing, right? And then I'm using the target inner HTML and attaching the response text. That's what I'm doing. Then I do the open. So first I set up the listener, and then I do my open request. And my open request says, hey, get from the source URL, the data from the source URL. That's what I'm doing. And then I need to complete it with the send, which is empty. And that's it. All right. So now that I have my insert HTML, I can insert whatever I want. Let's do more of a protracted example. All right. So this insert HTML function that we created here together, right? If I go into my index.html now, I have this navigation. And I want the navigation to be the same on every page. Every page of my site is going to have the same navigation. So I have my header. Here's my header, right? And I have my footer. Here's my footer. And I have my content. Here's my content. I want to remove all this stuff and abstract it into different files. So let's start with my header. So instead of my header being hello world, right, I want to inject my navigation into a place in my index.html. So where would I do that? I have my header. Here's my header. And I want to inject this part, this nav bar stuff, into my header object. So I'm going to kind of cut that out. Here's my header, right? I'm going to go into my header HTML and paste it in. That's the entire navigation bar, my main nav in my header. Okay? Oh, I need some kind of destination tag. So here's my destination tag. And actually, I can even go without that too, if I really want to. I can inject I can create my page dynamically, right? So there's my header. So my app header is now this. And let's do the same thing for my footer. So I'm going to grab this stuff. This is my bottom nav. And I'm going to go into my footer and inject that. On my footer, I've got that piece of code, that piece of text, and this is my header. It's not complete HTML, right? It only has my nav information. That's it. There is no body. There is no head, title, nothing. Just a partial. That's why it's called partials. They're partial files, right? So there's two partials, a header partial, right? And a footer partial, okay? And inside my index.html now, let's be strategic. Let's be really strategic, right? I don't even need an ID. No, just bear with me. I don't even need an ID. I just need my header and my footer, right? And if I go into my app.js, I can make some changes. So instead of destination ID, right, which is better to use destination tag, right? So let's rename this. Rename. I'm not updating this, or dest. We'll call it dest just to keep it short. Dest tag, destination tag, right? And instead of get element by ID, we'll get element by tag name, right? So I can do that too, right? I can say dot get element by tag name, elements by tag name. And that means I only want the first element, as an example, that matches that particular tag. And if I'm careful, I don't have to use IDs in this particular case. The first element, or the 0th element that matches that tag. I have header and I have footer. Now this is assuming that you're only going to have one header and one footer, okay? However, some pages are made with different footer and header, and you'd have to modify your insert HTML function to accommodate that, like search by ID, search by class, whatever, right? You can search for wherever you want. You can use a query selector inside here and make a query, whatever you want to insert to. Yeah. I'm going to do that now. Let me show you this. Okay, so here's my destination tag, right? And now down in here, instead of my destination tag being test, my destination tag could be header. I'm looking for my header. I'm inserting my header. Okay, that's what I'm doing. And let's do the next one. Insert HTML. That's why the function is there. I want to say look in views, look in partials, look in footer.html, right? And I want to insert it in footer, right? So header and footer is going to be, that's where it's going to be inserted, header and footer. And if I look in my index.html, I don't need test anymore. That's just something that I had in there for now, right? But I have a footer, which is kind of empty, and a header, which is empty. And I'm going to inject my navigation inside there. Let's see if it works. Like, it's a good idea, you know, in your head. It's a good idea. But what about implementation? So let's go back and, okay, there's no navigation bar. Because if I had the navigation bar, the navigation would be injected here. But there is this copyright bar, which is interesting. So the header, the footer found it, but the header was missing somehow. Right? So look, so no header, there's no navigation here, right? And notice what it says here. It says I found this part, right? But somehow my other one is gone. So this part worked. The nav bar on the bottom worked, but not the footer, not the header, somehow. Okay, and we can know that we loaded the same thing twice. Look, it says twice. How'd that work, right? Remember, in practice is one way, and in theory, it's another way. So, I mean, that's interesting because in my app.js, I said partials header.html header and partials footer.html footer. Well, I don't understand. How come it did this? What if we just commented this out? Let's comment this out for a second and see what happens. Hey, there's my header. And look, there's my navigation, right? What? I don't understand. Huh? Switch? Well, no, I mean, why would this happen? I mean, header works and then footer doesn't work, right? Yeah. Because of this. Because what we're doing, right, is we're setting up a ready state change. We're making a ready state change that listens for different things, right? We're actually setting up that inner HTML, insert HTML twice. We did it twice, right? We're basically saying something like this. We're saying, hey, inside of my function, it's a nice idea, right, that we're doing. It works the first time. But when we go and do this again, I'm adding another event listener that overwrites the first one and injects it into a different place, right? So something's wrong here. We have to figure something out where I can do it more generically. How would I do this more generically, right? And why isn't this working, right? And this is the common way, these common things happen. When people try an Ajax for the first time, they're like, I don't get it. It should work, right? Remember, Ajax is asynchronous, right? So it's loading twice. First time, then the second time. And every time we hit this insert HTML, right, what happens is we rewrite this add event listener. We actually add another event listener called ready state change, right? This is done twice, right? And this shouldn't be. This should only be once, right? We should only do this one time, right, ever, if this event listener ready state change doesn't exist, right? That's what happened. And then when we make this get request, my open request and my send request, it should just fill in this information based on what we got. That's how it should be. Because what I'm really doing is I'm setting up an event listener twice. Does that make sense? Because the XML, the event listener works for the first time, but not for any other time. And I want it to work every time, right? So how do we fix this? Well, let's try a couple things that are going to fail, right? I'm telling you they're going to fail because I've done this before a couple times, right? So let's try our header, and we'll say that instead of asynchronous, we'll put false. Remember, there's true and false. True is for asynchronous, and false is for no asynchronous. So I'm going to say something like, well, I don't want to make an asynchronous request. Actually, we won't put it here. We'll make it always false. We'll say that in here when we do our get request, it's going to be false. It's not going to be asynchronous. Is going to be synchronous. And let's see what we get. So now we got this again. That didn't really help. And we got to look at our navigation. We got all of our navigation. This is interesting. In our file, right? We got our navigation. Here's our navigation, right? And then we got two of these requests, right? Let me refresh that so you can see that. We got our navigation. We loaded it. There it is. And we also got these twice somehow. Huh? What? I don't understand. And if I refresh this again, you're going to see the same thing over. And it says, look, synchronous XML HTTP request on the main thread is deprecated because of its detrimental effects to the end user's experience. Right? Because it would be, right? You're waiting for one thing to load before the other thing loads. And that is terrible, right? You want it to load all at once. So that's an issue, right? I'm just putting it out there. That is an issue. Okay, what else? So we tried that. That's wrong. And if I go back to this and I press save and go back, and you get only two of these, but none of the other one, right? Because this one here overrides this one. All right, well, what if I made this a two-part of this insert HTML part, right? The first part is always listening for change, right? And I'm going to send something to that other function from this function, right? I'm always listening for a change. And when I listen for a change, I'm going to, when I set this up, this little XML XHR add event listener, right? I want to inject the target. That's all I really care about. The target is going to be the thing that I want to inject. Okay? Whatever that target is that going to fix the problem? And here's something else. What if, I'm just putting it out there, right? What if I only put 200? So let's say we tried this part, all right? I want to fool with this thing. And I'm going to say, well, I don't care about the ready state 4. What if I just did 200? What does that do? I want to fool around so you understand the effect, guys. All right? So ready status 200. So I don't care about the other one, and I still load it. I'm pretty good, right? I don't need a ready state 4 at all, right? But it's 4 times, yeah. And there's like 2 times a blank. Look, yeah.
make another variable and that get the tag of the other one.
I could. I mean, that's the target, right? That's the target of the other one, right? I could do that, right? I'm just putting it out there. You know, we're thinking in a synchronous way, though. That's the problem when we think asynchronous. Okay, so that's one. So that still works. So if I do this, that still works. Actually, you know, this thing always works, and you get some couple of blanks. Notice that you get a couple blanks there and some extra data. And what if I just did this part and I didn't do this part? So I don't do this part as an example, and I do ready state 4, but I still get 2. This kind of worked out, right? 2, and this is the same as this one for now. But that means because the file is found, right? What if I made a mistake and I didn't put header, I put headers, right? Then what am I going to get, right? Actually, let's not put footers and headers, right? Then I'm going to get this error. Interestingly enough, right? Cannot get, because headers and footers don't load, right? And because I don't have a check to see that it's there, I don't have a state of 200, then my ready state 4 doesn't matter, right? I could layer it too. I could do it differently here. I'm gonna instead of doing it this way, let's do it this way. Let's say something like this. I'm just putting it out there so you guys can see the differences, guys, because I don't want you guys to just be reading a piece of code and then copy paste. Okay. So here's another one. So what if I did this? If I said my XHR first has to be ready, so my ready state change, my ready state, right? Instead of ready state 4, remember, because there's 2 parts. There's ready state and status. I want to say my status has to be 200 first. What if my status is equal to 200, exactly equal, right? And I'm going to take this part after that part. It's kind of doing an and, but a little differently. I'm looking for my status first and then my ready state. All right. Now it says 404. I can't get my footers. This is good. Guess what it should say? It shouldn't mess my page up. Let's redo the footer, right? So I'm going to say this part here. We'll call it footer instead of footers. It's still going to load this secondly, right? But this piece here, as you're going to notice, it still does this part nice, this part. But if I go back to my page, right, this is the same as the other way I had it, right? All it does is says, hey, first I want a status of 200, so it has to be found. I need to find it. And then after I find it, then I want to say that it's finished loading. And I think I like this way better, right? As opposed to one and the other. You can also do it the other way by actually listening for the status first and then the ready state. Status, because your and, whenever you do a logical and, what ends up happening is you have 2 parts to the logical and, right? The first part is, hey, is this condition true? And is this condition true? We're asking for it the other way around. We're saying, hey, are we finished loading everything? And now, at the same time, is it true? Is it true that we're that the status is 200, right? It should be the other way around, because I'm going to get more times than not. If the status is a 404, as an example, then only when the status is if it's a 404, I don't care about ready state, because I haven't found my file, right? Files doesn't exist. Don't worry about ready state if file doesn't exist, right? But if I look at the other way around, I'm looking for my ready state, and it might be a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but I don't even know if the file exists yet. And then if you talk to people online, they can tell you that it really doesn't matter, because it's asynchronous. It's looking for both things at the same time, right? And this is where people are messed up about it. So this little request here, it's a neat idea that we put it inside of our insert HTML, but it doesn't make any sense because I'm doing it twice. That's what's happening, right? It's almost like it belongs on its own, right? And what I need to do is just the open and the send, right? But I need to be able to inject my target somehow, right? I need to inject my target in here. My target, whatever the target is the thing that I want to inject my XHR request response text object inside of there. Right? That's what I want to do. All right. So we're close, but we're not quite there. Any questions so far? So you understand what's happening, right? So going back to what I did, if I just did the second part, the first part, I want to go this slow because otherwise I'm going to lose you when it comes to the next part, right? So this part here is good because now I get I can get a URL, and it's going to be the same URL on every page, the same navigation bar on every page. And in fact, I can check to see what page I'm on, and I can say that if I'm on the home page, I can modify the stuff that I inject. After it's injected, I can check to see if it's there, and if I can go through and I can modify the nav bar to kind of include which one is active. Just remember we did that whole, every page has a different navigation, right? Well, depending on which page I'm on, I can check to see which page I'm on, and then I can change my my class on my home or my contact or my ID or whatever to show that that's active, not the other one. So right now my home is active, but my contact is not active, right? There's no, because I don't have a contact section. Okay, so that's kind of the way that we do it, and we were able to do it with one, but not the other. Okay, how about instead of this, right? And I'm just going to put it out there again. So there's this add event listener, a ready state change. What if I did it the other way around? So instead of ready state change as a function, I did on ready state change. You can do that as well, right? It's exactly the same thing. There's no difference. And how does Ajax work with jQuery? We're going to answer that question, I'm hoping tomorrow, right? Because the way jQuery works, it's a shorthand for JavaScript, right? And this is why I don't like teaching it too much, right? But think about jQuery. The way jQuery would work would be something that looks like this. I have $, right? $sign is when you say $sign for jQuery, it's like saying, hey, jQuery, right? And then I press the dot, okay? And if I say Ajax, right? And then if I open up Ajax, it says, okay, so what do I want to send to jQuery, right? Here's my Ajax settings. And I can pass in whatever kind of Ajax request I want to make, okay? But literally, it's much easier to use Ajax, or even easier than this. I want to say, hey, jQuery, I want to make a GET request, right? I want to get a GET request. And my GET request, here's my URL string that I want to use for my GET request. Like jQuery is very well documented, and this is why people use it, because it's easier, right? And notice that it's a URL that I want to make. So I want to say my URL is my footer. Let's do my footer bar, okay? So I want to say my /views/partials/footer.html. The other one has been commented out, right? Okay, cool. I want to get my footer, right? That's really cool. And notice that I have some options to do success. Notice that there's the string for URL. And now when I press comma, I have a success. Here's my success. And I get data for my success, right? And I have this jQuery plain object. I also have or. So these are all ors. I can do either some data or a plain object or some kind of XHR done callback, right? So I can do a callback, right? Here's my callback function for jQuery. This is what jQuery would look like, right? And then I want to kind of say something like, well, my data is what I want to see. So we'll say a console log and then data. Let's see what happens with that one. So I get something that's a mistake. It says that uncaught reference error data is not defined because I have to pass it in here, I think. And yeah, there it is. There's the data right here. And that's how much you have to do for jQuery. Like it's that simple, right? jQuery basically says, hey, use a GET request, pass in the URL, and what are you going to do with the data? That's it. And if I want to, I can inject it. I can say that, let's do it. Let's inject it. And so I'm going to end it here today, and then we're going to fix it tomorrow, okay? So I want to show you the difference between one way and the other way and how jQuery helps or fixes it, okay? So I want to do something like this. I want to say that let my target is equal to document.getElementBy tag name. And I want to look at the, my tag name is going to be footer, right? And I want to look at the first occurrence of the footer, right, inside my thing. And I want to say that target, just like we did before, .innerHTML is equal to data. Like that's simple. And if I do that, and boom, we got both, right? One is using my custom function. The other one is using jQuery. Now you're going to say, sorry? Absolutely, absolutely. You can always use jQuery.
What would you recommend?
I recommend we make our own. I recommend we learn how to do it with vanilla JavaScript, with no jQuery, right? Because jQuery, in order for me to use jQuery, I have to have a big library. jQuery is a massive library that I load in, right? And yeah, okay, we can use jQuery here. It makes sense for us to use jQuery in our case because we're loading jQuery anyway because we're using Bootstrap. And Bootstrap requires jQuery. So it's okay to use jQuery because we're using Bootstrap. It's already there, right? We can leverage what we already have. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, okay? So that's one option. However, there might be a project that you want to use Ajax that has no jQuery. And you don't want to inject jQuery just for Ajax. You want to know how to do Ajax vanilla by itself, right? And so we're going to handle that tomorrow, okay?
It's possible to make multiple.
Which? Oh, with jQuery? Yeah, so let's say, yeah, jQuery, this is Ajax with jQuery, this part right here, right? Oh, this, yeah. Well, I can make it a name function. Instead of a callback like this, I can make a name function that passes that gets the data. So basically, what this does is says, hey, jQuery, send up an event listener that listens for changes that loads this thing. When this is done loading, inject the data into this into whatever. I do something with the data that I'm going to get. Yeah. So I could do that, or I could just do this twice. I can just say something like, because the function would be extra, but I could do something like, okay, let's just comment this out. Just for our thing, we'll put this as header, right? Header.html, and we're going to go into the header, right? That makes sense? And now, same. This does the work that I did with my function, right? The function doesn't work yet, but it will tomorrow. All right, I just wanted to show you the beginnings of it. We start thinking about, but this is the way you do it through jQuery. So jQuery, the only reason why I use jQuery ever is for Ajax. That's the only reason why I use it now. I don't use it for almost anything else because I can do almost anything by myself. I don't need jQuery for it, right? But look how easy and beautiful this is for jQuery. jQuery makes this Ajax stupidly easy, like truly, right? And if I want to return JSON data instead of because this data could be anything, right? It could even be JSON data. So if I want to load JSON, and hold on 1 second more, right? We'll do another request, but instead of loading a partial file, I make a new JSON file that I'll hold somewhere inside of my files. Maybe we'll put it inside of my, just like loosely up here, we'll put it, it's a loose file that we call data.json. And my data.json is inside views right now. We're just going to pull it out and we'll put it inside the root for now, just so we can get it real easy. So in my data.json, because it's JSON, we need to format it with JSON. We have to say something like, just like we did before, my address book, we'll do address book, right? Address book is some kind of array, right? And inside my array, we have a contact, right? Here's my array of objects. And my contact has a name attribute, which is going to be me, right? And it also has a number. So here's my number, name and number, and 416 555 5555, right? Sorry, I'm recording. Otherwise, I would share it with you. And I take this and duplicate it. We'll make another one. We'll call this, instead of Tom, we'll make it John Smith. And he's going to have 556. All right, the same number. Okay, I don't know. All right, so there's some JSON data. Yeah, that's JSON. And then what I want to do is I want to load JSON instead of HTML. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, okay, don't go to partials. Let's just load JSON on the data.json. Is the root. I'm going to take my data, and instead of inserting it into HTML, let's put it on the, we won't insert it anywhere. We won't do this at all because we don't need to insert it. We'll just print it out to the console. So we'll say that console.log, and we'll say json.parse data. Parse it because it turns that from a string into JSON data, right? And if I did this, And if I go back out, you can see that I get some weird error. It says unexpected token JSON, right? But what I want to do is I want to do, oh, sorry, it's not parse, JSON.parse. It's parse.json. Parse. Try again. Parse, and I think it's JSON.parse, but let me see. I think it's JSON.parse. Let me just check 1 second. Mind, I'm sorry, guys. JSON.parse JavaScript. And yeah, it is. I'm right. I was right. Oh, okay. JSON.parse, and make sure that it's there. Inner HTML object, and here it is. Yeah, I was correct. JSON.parse. JSON.parse. Okay, so I was right. What the hell? Why didn't it work? JSON. I was right. This doesn't like JSON. JSON.parse data is what I did, right? So unless I did something different. What was that? Was there? Doesn't matter. It won't error out. No. You can get as many semicolons as you want in your file. But it doesn't like JSON. Anyways, we'll figure this out tomorrow. I've just kind of thrown this together, but the idea is that it's JSON. And to prove this, if I just didn't parse it, and if I just went console log data, then you're going to see that I get this array of 2 objects, which is JSON. So there it is. So I can see that I got my 2 objects. So it actually returns it as objects, object data, not as HTML. Okay, and that's all I want to hit you with today. Tomorrow we'll do more, and we'll have a little exercise, that I want you guys to do tomorrow on JSON and Ajax. Okay, thanks so much, guys.